Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience. We greatly appreciate it. We try to keep these smooth, but occasionally we do have some technical difficulties. So thank you. We really appreciate your patience. As you know, my name is Leslie Harvey. I'm the board president for the Hawaii Economic Association. And I am so pleased to welcome our panel today representing various sectors, public, private, nonprofit, for this discussion on what is driving unaffordability in Hawaii. A heads up, we are recording this webinar today and are joined by the media who's covering this event. As you know, HEA members are invited to participate in our Q&A by using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. This is strictly a member benefit, and if that's something that you're interested in, HEA membership is only $40 for the year. However, we do have that last poll question, so we will have that open to everybody here initially. If you'd like to respond to that last question, you can add your response to the Q&A. At the end of today's event resources, including slides and the event recording, will be provided. Please also take a moment at the end of our event today to let us know how we did via the feedback form. We'll share that link with you at the end, and attendees will also receive the link by email. If you have any technical issues during this webinar, please send a direct message to myself or to Heather through the chat. Now, before our panelists join, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Josh Wisch. Josh Wisch is President and Executive Director of Holomua Collective, a local nonprofit whose mission is to make Hawaii affordable for all working families. Josh has 2 decades of cross-sector professional experience in Hawaii, including serving as the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Hawaii, the ACLU, a private sector litigator, District Director for Congresswoman Macy Hirono, Deputy Director for the Hawaii Department of Taxation, Special Assistant to the State Attorney General, and Manager of multiple Hawaii political campaigns. He holds degrees from Carnegie Mellon University and Georgetown University Law Center. Josh, turn it over to you.
Hi, I am trying to start my video, Leslie, but it's saying it won't let me.
All right, so let's get that here, Josh. Thank you.
And people not seeing my face wouldn't be the worst thing. You know, that's okay.
No, we want to see you. Let me get that. Let's see. Again, folks, technical difficulties. Appreciate your patience. Josh, you should be able to come on out. Okay, great.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. Hey, thanks a lot, Leslie. I appreciate it. So everybody, thanks so much for joining. It looks like we've got about 40 people here today, and I know that we're in the middle of legislative session, and so it's an especially busy time for many. So thanks all the more for joining. I wanted to do just a quick introduction of our panelists today, just because I know not everybody may have gotten a chance to read some of the bios on the invitation, and also because there were a couple of panelists who we weren't sure which ones were going to be joining us today, and so now we do, and I want to make sure that I can share a little bit about their bios as well. First we have Brittany Heyd from Mana Up. Brittany is co-founder of Mana Up, a $6.3 million venture fund and Hawaii-based economic development initiative to grow local products to markets globally. Before Mana Up, Brittany was co-founder and managing director at 1776, where she grew the organization from idea to global business, including a $12.5 million venture fund, 5 locations and events in 75 cities across the country. Brittany also held positions at the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Latham and Watkins, and Mark IV Capital. And full disclosure, Brittany is also on our advisory committee at Holomua Collective. Seth Colby from the Hawaii Department of Taxation is the Tax Research and Planning Officer there. He manages the Tax Research and Planning Office, which produces revenue forecasts, revenue impact estimates of proposed legislation, public policy analysis, and statistical reports. Seth teaches economics at the University of Hawaii's Scheidler College of Business. Prior to joining DOTAX, Seth's career focused on economic and social development in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa, where he worked for the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, and Johns Hopkins University. We're also going to be joined by Nicole Wu from Hawaii Children's Action Network. She is the Director of Research and Economic Policy. Nicole has over 2 decades of policy and research experience looking into childhood hunger, work-family support strategies, wages and economic inequality, and tax and budget policies at nonprofit organizations and think tanks in New York, Washington, D.C., Bangalore, India, and Hawaii. Nicole received her BA from Harvard University, where she concentrated in government. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Mitzi Higa. Mitzi is a government relations specialist at the Hawaii State Teachers Association, who received her bachelor's degree in education from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, her master's degree from National University, and her doctorate in education from USC Rochier School of Education. She has an intense interest in furthering the quality of public education through connections between college, high school, middle school, and elementary education programs in their communities. And she is also the Democratic Party of Hawaii Labor Caucus legislative chair. And of course, for all of our distinguished panelists, if there is anything that I got wrong or I left out, please jump in at any time to correct me. So I wanted to start just by giving each panelist a couple of minutes to share anything else that they would like to introduce themselves, and to get their initial thoughts on one or two key factors that make Hawaii such an unaffordable place to live. And after we do some of those just initial thoughts, then I'm going to jump into some additional discussion prompts with one panelist at a time, and then going into a broader conversation. So just going in alpha order by sector, and so starting with the for-profit sector. Brittany, could I turn it over to you to share anything else on your background and what you're doing, and just one or two key factors that you think make Hawaii an unaffordable place to live?
Sure. Thank you, Josh. And thank you for having me today on the panel. I'm excited to see all the attendees. So thank you for the introduction. I'm Brittany. I am co-founder of Mana Up, and we started Mana Up as an accelerator program for local products, all around how do we really grow businesses that can not only start here in Hawaii, but also stay and thrive as they grow to global markets. So it's really exciting. You know, we're in our 6th year, and we've had 74 companies come through our accelerator program. They make up over 61 million in annual revenue as of 2021 data. Actually, 40 million of that comes from outside of Hawaii. So that's really amazing, right? Because we're bringing new dollars into the state through e-commerce, through partners like Whole Foods, who are expanding Hawaii products into their Southern California, Northern California, all these different locations. So all of that is super exciting, and that's what we do. But going to the affordability question, I think there's so many different factors that contribute to it. But one especially that's pertinent in my day-to-day life. I live on Maui, and I think the recent data is that 30% of houses bought on Maui last year were bought from out-of-state residents, which drives prices higher and all sorts of stuff. And so when locals are competing on one salary level and we have others who are competing on a different salary level, all buying the same houses, it's pretty easy to see why it's so expensive for people to have housing. And then more on the business side around affordability, why don't we have those salaries that compete with other places across the United States? And I think one piece of that is we are a smaller economy, on an island with a little over 1 million people. So we really think about like, how are we expanding that market, bringing new dollars into the state, and really having businesses have more opportunities for success that can drive revenue, that can drive all sorts of opportunities, so that we can build salaries to the level to afford what it takes to live here. So I will pass along to the next panelist. Thank you, Josh.
Hey, thanks so much, Brittany. And continuing, just kind of going in a little bit of alphabetical order. As you see, we've tried to bring together a cross-sector group of people today. Selfishly, that is admittedly in part because at Holomua, one of the things we're trying to do is to build cross-sector discussions, relationships, and therefore solutions. And looking at for-profit, government, labor, nonprofit, in that order, our next one would be government. So Seth, if I could turn it over to you to share a little bit more about your background and your initial one or two thoughts on what makes Hawaii an unaffordable place. And I'll note too, just for all of our panelists, certainly a timely question to start off with, because one of our first Q&A questions is what exactly is affordable, which I think is one of the things we're all trying come to grips with. So Seth, let me turn it over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Just in terms of affordability, as an econ teacher, I think it's just really important to remember that, the reason why it's expensive here is a function of supply and demand, right? So a lot of people want to live in Hawaii, and we do not offer, we do not supply a lot of goods that we think are very important here, right? So we don't supply a lot of housing. We don't supply, it's very difficult to supply other goods and services here for a number of reasons. One of which is we live on an island, the most remote island chain in the world. And if you look at any small island economy, things tend to be expensive there. So we would already expect that Hawaii is going to be an expensive place to live. That being said, there are things within our control and there's things not in our control. And so, being in a remote island chain is kind of part of the bargain of living in Hawaii, right? And everything's going to be very expensive. On the other hand, there are lots of policies and decisions over which the populace has control, right? So this is the amount of housing, this is the level of taxation, this is the these are the rules and regulations that we collectively as a society make decisions about. So I think that fundamentally is what's driving affordability. And if we really want to understand and really drive down on things, then we have to figure out about what we have control over and what we don't have control over. And it's, I don't think like logistics and things, we could probably bring it down a little bit, but it's not going to have a huge impact on affordability. Whereas like zoning regulations, figuring out how to support and ensure that people are, we have high levels of human capital, have good education systems, and people can access good jobs, and we can participate in a good global economy, that would help with affordability, right? But one thing to just keep in mind is, affordability, there's, like I said, there's the supply and the demand. So just boosting people's incomes is not necessarily going to help with the affordability plan if we cannot provide more goods and services as it goes. From the, I work in the government, so I focus a lot more on public policies. I do want to note that like affordability has been a problem in Hawaii for since the beginning of time, right? In about 40 or 50 years. And so, we are always trying, people are always trying to propose new ideas. Oh, we need new industries, do things. But, nothing's really changed in Hawaii fundamentally in the last 40 years. So as we think about new ideas and we really are trying to address these solutions, it's important to think about what we've done in the past over the last 40 years and why those haven't worked. And if we're going to try something new, we need a new theory of change. And we can't be doing the same things as we've been doing before.
Seth, thanks a lot. And one of the great things I think also about the panelists is because of, in addition to the fact that they're all at the top of their fields, because of the different backgrounds, we're going to get different perspectives from everybody. And so with Seth's background and looking at all the statistics he sees coming through DOTAX and his economics background, we're now going to go to someone who spends all their time working with union members and working with the labor movement. And I know, Mitzi, you're going to have your own particular thoughts on this. So if I could turn it over to you to share some of your additional thoughts on your background and a couple of the factors you think make things unaffordable here.
Okay. Hi, Mitzi here. Speaking, I work with a lot of labor groups. So being on the labor caucus of the Democratic Party of Hawaii, I get to hear from all the other labor groups of what is happening in their area. And I also work with HSTA, Hawaii State Teachers Association, as I was introduced. And what I've noticed is there's some commonalities. The problem of affordability, a big part is housing. Over half of our housing costs or pay goes towards housing. And even more, I mean, when you're a new teacher, I gotta tell you, it's a struggle. We have teachers that are supposed to be middle class, but there's 5 rooming in a house to afford on the west side. And this is on Oahu, 5 teachers. This is on the Big Island. Lanai, don't even get me started. It is really hard to find affordable places to live. So that is a huge reason that we have a teacher shortage. It's a huge reason for a lot of other labor. I mean, if we can't support our labor in Hawaii, who's going to do the work? I mean, we have to be able to support the affordability to live here in Hawaii. And that's what I see in different labor organizations. I mean, you think teachers are struggling. I know people who don't have a teaching degree are struggling even more if they don't have a college education or a trade. Like sometimes it's a trade, like my plumber makes more than I do. You know, I get it. Trades are so vital to our survival, to uplifting all of us. And we just, food has gone up, gas, oh my gosh, don't even get us started. And I know we're an island economy. I know all of that. However, and I'm so happy that our labor organizations have been supporting our public education. And we'll get to that later, I'm sure, about how supporting public education actually helps our whole economy grow.
Thanks so much, Mitzi. And so now I wanted to bring Nicole into the conversation. And Nicole, you of course have an extensive background working at nonprofits in locations all across the country and all across the world. And you've done a lot of work with people who are the most directly impacted, some of the people who have really low incomes in Hawaii. And so you're seeing people who are really struggling to make ends meet here, both with your time at Appleseed and right now with your time at HCAN. So with that brief intro, could you share a couple of your just initial thoughts on some of the issues that really impact affordability here?
Sorry, I've got too many screens open. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I work for Hawaii Children's Action Network, and we have been trying to actually quantify what we're hearing from parents in a way so that it's not just anecdotes. So we've been partnering with the University of Hawaii on a survey of parents of small children, birth to 7 years old. So far, we have about 500 responses. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides that just gives you a sense of what we're hearing from parents on the ground. If I can get this to work. So again, this is our Hawaii Families Thrive survey. We're still taking responses. So if you have families with small children who are residing in Hawaii, it's a 10-minute or so survey, and we're trying to get several thousand responses. And a couple of the questions that I think are pertinent to this group are, one is, what are the biggest challenges your family has faced this past year? And these are the top answers so far with the 500 clean responses that we've gotten. And it's all affordability, pretty much. Health and mental health care, the affordability and finding it. Affording basic needs like food, housing, or transportation. Affording childcare or finding childcare. Needing paid leave or sick time off of work. And being able to save money or pay off debts. Again, those are the top 5 responses we're getting from these parents. And then, we asked a question, what would you like Hawaii's leaders to do to help families like yours with young children? And again, these are the top 6 responses. And for both of these questions, we asked them to select 3, and there was a long menu of options for them. First one, more than half would like to have 12 weeks of paid leave if they have a new baby or adopt a new child. Again, childcare, making it low cost or free, preschool, better maternal health services, better health service for children, and giving families a monthly cash for a child or family allowance, which is another affordability issue. So just to give a little plug, we have a C4 called Hawaii Children's Action Network Speaks, so 501c4, a lobbying type of branch of our organization. And we're looking at childcare, paid family leave, and tax credits for working families as ways to help them with the affordability issues. So if you have more questions, reach out to me. You can go to one of our websites, Hawaii Children's Action Network, which is where the survey is, or the Speaks page, which is where we have our legislative priorities. I hope that's helpful.
That's great. Thank you so much, Nicole. So what I'm going to do now is for about the next 20 minutes or so, I wanted to give each panelist some specific questions that are particular to their background and expertise. And then we wanted to go into a little bit of a broader discussion. I'll just note to the panelists that we do have a number of questions that are popping into the Q&A panel. Some of them seem to be for anyone. A couple of them are for particular panelists. So I'm going to pose the initial questions I have to each of you. And I'd like each person to take about 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when we're about there. If you want to fold in some thoughts on these questions as we do that, that is great. Otherwise, I'll try to circle back to these after we get through this next section. So let me go back and go back to Brittany to start up. So Brittany, coming from the for-profit sector and helping to build up other local companies, and Mana Up's vision is to fuel an economic growth engine for Hawaii that can generate success for the local economy. You've worked with a lot of small local companies that are trying to grow. And so I was wondering, particularly from that perspective, as someone who is helping companies create jobs, can you share how your clients deal with issues of affordability in Hawaii for themselves, but also for the people they employ and also for their customers?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Josh. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of locally owned businesses, most of them under 10 million in revenue, actually all of them under 10 million in revenue, and generally, around 5 to 7 years old, but maybe younger, maybe a little bit older. So that's the world in which we live in at Mana Up. But to dive into this a little bit deeper, right? Like, it's really hard to start a business here and to grow it. So, to get the support, to get the capital, to, do all of those things is really difficult to figure out, regulations, HR, like just all of those things is really difficult. And we are in a small internal market of our island. So, right off the bat, you're not having as many people or as much open to you as maybe you would if you were in some larger area. So how do we, so those certain things, may have the deck stacked against you a little bit just from starting, but it's so important to have locally owned businesses. And I think one thing that really, speaks to us a lot is what is the multiplier effect of having our locally owned businesses here in our economy, right? Because they're employing local people, they're spending money with other local businesses, they're banking with our local banks, all of those types of things that is helping to drive more dollars spent in our own communities, as well as 95% of the companies within Mana Up have their own community givebacks, even though they're all really small. So they're donating a % of revenue to local nonprofits. They're doing in-kind product donations. They may even do certain things where they work with farmers to help them grow their or turn their crops into value-add products. So there's a lot of really great things that are happening when we have our locally owned businesses where the owners and the employees and everyone is here in our own community. So what makes it hard from an affordability standpoint? Well, they have to be really capital efficient because we don't have a lot of investment capital here. And oftentimes they're not bankable, so they don't have loan capital available to them. So they have to know where every dollar is going. They don't have this growth capital to help them, make mistakes. There's no margin for error. So when you're starting a business, that's hard because you're learning every single thing for the first time, but every single mistake you're paying for. And that's why a lot of businesses go under over the long term, because you make one too many mistakes and you can't make ends meet. So that's where Mana Up comes in. in helping to de-risk the growth path and provide resources. So one key thing that we're doing from a community standpoint is when we have all the entrepreneurs together, they can ask each other, hey, what resource did you use for this? What, graphic design person did you use for that? And all of these little things add up to helping them make less mistakes and being able to really efficiently use their capital for growth and hiring employees and all that sort of stuff. So that's a little bit into the world of our small businesses. And when we talk about the affordability for employees and customers, right, they're in teams of, maybe 5, maybe 10 employees. And so you really feel it when, somebody is having financial challenges. But, these businesses themselves don't have deep pockets to go into. So I think, going back to how can we help these businesses to be successful so they can, hire more employees, pay them better, and really help to grow more in our local economy. And then also from the customer standpoint, being able to diversify the customer base, not only generating great local customers here in our community, but also diversifying so that we're bringing those new dollars into the state and, expanding the pie rather than, just taking, a customer from someone down the street. So all of those things, I think, factor into affordability and what's really at stake within our small businesses.
Thanks so much, Brittany. As we move on to the next person, if you want to take a look at the Q&A, and when we circle back to the broader panel discussion after this, if there are any of the questions in there, the broad ones are the ones that are directed to you that you think you might be in a position to address, that'd be great. And let me now go back to Seth. So Seth, you're in kind of a unique position at tax at having this kind of 60,000 foot view of how tax policy impacts the entire population of the state. You get to see actual numbers on how tax credits impact affordability, how many people use them, what might be the barriers to their use, how different tax brackets impact affordability, what happens when someone shifts from one bracket to another. So I was wondering, from that kind of bird's eye view, if you could share a little bit of what you've seen from a tax policy perspective that has helped to make Hawaii affordable, and maybe what didn't work, what maybe even backfired.
Okay. Well, I'll just, when you talk about tax policy, one of the things I'd like to begin with is there's no right tax policy, right? There's the tax policy that people want and demand from their government, right? And so there's definitely low tax states, and then there's high tax states. And then one of the questions when you have and Hawaii's a high tax state. We all kind of know that, right? The question that you should think about is, are you getting your money's worth, right? And the only people need to decide that. And so one of the things I do see a lot is, like, in terms of budgets and things, that's if we just spend money on the problem, it will more likely get fixed. But, that's not necessarily true, just because if it's very hard to have high levels of accountability and efficiency within our government, it's actually very hard to spend money wisely. And that's true for any government around the world, anywhere around the world. And so it's just helpful to think about those things, because we can often think of, like, oh, if I just put money in this sector, it will magically be better, right? But money is nothing. Money is a tool, or it's actually, it's a price, is like, it's a signal wrapped up in an incentive, is what some people say. But it's like, it's really sending things there. But like, what we're really worried about is how things get done, right? And so that's just something to think about in terms of tax policy and what we think about. Now, Hawaii's tax policy, we have, I would say, two main, Hawaii's revenue is based on like three main pillars, essentially. You got the GET, which is our sales tax. It's a special type of sales tax. You got the individual income tax, and then you have the TAT, which is a transient accommodation tax. Transient accommodation tax is relatively small compared to the other two, so I'm going to focus on the general excise tax and the individual income tax. The general excise tax is our largest tax. There's a lot of I hear in the headlines about driving up the cost of business and doing things like that. We've done a number of studies, and it does generate a lot of revenue. And the reason it generates a lot of revenue is it's basically every single transaction that's in Hawaii takes place within Hawaii. The GET is usually levied on that. Now, there's some certain exceptions to that, like mortgage payments and other things like that. But you can kind of think of anytime you make a transaction, GET is levied on that. There is worried about pyramiding and things like that. We have done our analysis, and on the GET, and we found that the pyramiding is relatively low. So we have a 4% GET at the state level, and we think with pyramiding it's 4.7%. The reason why it is so low is that the GET has a low rate. So the way pyramiding is, you have a tax and tax and tax. And so what you actually do is, like, if we had an 8% GET, then our tax pyramiding would be 4 to 16 times higher than what it is right now at 4%, right? Because it's exponential on that. So that's something about the GET. It is known for being a regressive tax. When we think about regressivity, it's important to remember what regressivity is. It's the amount of tax you pay as a proportion to your income, right? So just more higher income people pay more in taxes, even in regressive tax systems, usually, because they spend more money, right? But it might be less of their tax income. The reason why the GET is generally regressive is because higher income people save more of their income, and they also get to have spend money on their mortgages, and that's why it's a regressive tax. However, over the course of a lifetime, most people spend all of their savings, and so everybody has to spend. Like, if you spend anything other than on your mortgage, that's generally taxed in Hawaii. So the regressivity is sometimes smaller than what people think. But it is important to think about our tax system as a whole, right? So we do have the food excise tax credit, and to offset the burdens of those costs on lower income people. And so most people get several $100 or low income families can have several $100s worth of credits to offset the burden of the GET, and that's by design. The individual income tax is, we have what we call a progressive tax system, which means that higher income people pay a bigger proportion of their income in taxes compared to lower income people, but it is actually pretty skewed. So if you can kind of think about it, at the very low income, we don't have very much, we don't have taxes. In fact, some people get tax refunds, right? But quickly moving up the income spectrum, you start paying taxes relatively quick in Hawaii. So you can think of 8.25% was, until 2017, was our highest tax bracket, and that takes effect at around $50,000 for a single payer and $96,000 for a family married filing jointly, right? So you can kind of think about, like, you used to hit our highest tax brackets pretty early on, and the reason for that is we really haven't adjusted our tax brackets in the last 30 or 40 years. We did add higher income tax brackets, but that doesn't really help the middle class. And so one of the things that does drive affordability for a lot of people is the income tax burden, which is probably higher than especially for middle income families, higher compared to other states. Again, that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just it's up to the taxpayers and the voters to decide if that's what they want to do and if they're getting good value for their money.
And Seth, we're a little bit past the time there, so we could maybe continue that part of the conversation when we come back to the full panel. Thanks for the insights there. And Mitzi, let me circle back to you now. With the work you do with the State Teachers Association, with the Labor Caucus for the Democratic Party, you've got front row seats to the priorities of labor unions and how those have evolved over the years in Hawaii. And what I'm wondering is, from that standpoint, if you could explore how those issues have affected your union members and what interventions have been suggested or implemented by the unions that have been helpful in addressing them. And to your point when you first introduced yourself, if you want to talk about some of that specifically with how it relates to public education because of your long work with HSTA, please go ahead and do that too. Thanks.
Okay. So part of working with labor unions, the power of a union is we can bargain, we can collectively bargain, and we can look at our workers and what they need, not just working conditions, but pay. And people always say that the opposite way around. Pay does matter because that's what manages our affordability here in Hawaii. And when you're talking about labor and our astronomical prices of housing, whether you're renting or buying, it's unfortunately teachers right now, just speaking for them, new teachers are like, I can't even afford a house here, like ever, and we're losing teachers. But other laborers are, a lot of teachers are married to iron workers, or they're married to the service industry sector, people from there. And looking at all the different industries, we look at not just now, but we also collectively bargain for retirement. Because if you look at Hawaii, our elderly population is only growing. And so thinking about retirement is vital. And that's one of the things that we fight for as well. Collectively with other unions, we look at what are we going to need to do for retirement, whether you're in the public or private sector, that's something you have to consider. And it shouldn't just be, I used to work in the private sector. It shouldn't just be what you save on your own, okay? Like a 401k that only you contribute to. Part of working and part of labor is understanding that your employees are going to need to retire one day, and how can you assist that and help? And that's what unions do together. For public schools, investing in our free public education is something that we all should have access to. And we're including public preschool in this conversation. We need to have that affordable because having a good education is what raises up the economy. Because if your workers are productive outside of school, once they've graduated, once they have more opportunity, once they've been trained in a field, whether it's labor or whatever industry they decide to go into, they are able to support themselves, and therefore they will draw less on other services that the state does provide. And thank goodness, I'm never saying to cut those services, because things happen. Medical needs to be there. It needs to be affordable or free for those who need it. And that helps keep them keeps them employed. It keeps them working. It keeps them earning money. And most people who have a lower income put their money right back into the economy, because as it was stated before, they don't have a lot of savings. Right? Unfortunately, they're not able to save. So whatever they earn, they go right into the economy, whether it's groceries, rent, whatever the case may be. I'm going to give you a couple examples of what's happening now. Because our property value went up so high, some of our teachers were renting, and I know this is happening in other sectors as well. And the property they were renting is put on the market and sold, and therefore they can no longer rent it. Then they look around for comparable rent. They cannot find it. So I know of teachers on Maui who have moved away, teachers on the Big Island who unfortunately moved away. They go to Texas, Idaho, South Carolina, any place where they could actually afford housing, and they actually have money left over for food and to save for their retirement. So investing in public education, we work on things like entrepreneurship now. We look at sectors in the industry that we can think of, how can we use value added products? How can we produce something here, make it marketable and export it somewhere else? What are the tech industries that we can actually use here? So we're looking at those in our schools as well, as how can we bring these, not just work for work's sake or to teach to have a job, but the more educated they are, the more opportunity they have. One of my teachers used to tell me back when I was in public school, why would you kick yourself in the shin by not getting a good grade and not studying hard? That's like you're attacking yourself. What you need to do is study hard, look at what opportunities are available, because otherwise you're shutting doors in your faces. So public education opens opportunity. for those who need it. And that's what will help our economy in the long run.
Thanks so much, Mitzi. I appreciate it. Nicole, one thing I'll note, one specific thing that did come up, by the way, in the Q&A was someone was asking, I think, for the link to the survey. So at some point that HCAN is putting out. So at some point during this, if you might be able to pop that into the chat, that would be great. And in turning it over to you next, HCAN, you spend your time addressing the root causes of poverty and inequity and developing public policies that help children and their families. And we saw some of the things that you have already found out from that survey that people are prioritizing as the main issues. And since you work every day with those families, some of the people who are most directly impacted by the lack of affordability in Hawaii, could you also share a little bit more, and you could tie into the survey or some other things of what you've learned from those folks with lived experience in terms of maybe what policies and interventions have actually helped them the most, and what they might want policymakers to know and the broader community to know as they look at addressing affordability issues?
Oh, sorry, I answered your question before. So, yeah, it's basically what I presented earlier. We hear things on the ground from folks, but we wanted to quantify it and make it more evidence-based, which is why we started this survey. And as I mentioned in the in my presentation, families are struggling with affordability issues. Should I go over what I did, or?
No. So one thing I was wondering is kind of in addition to the survey, just because if I'm understanding the survey right, those are some of the things that people have been telling HCAN. These are the issues that are most concerning to them right now. Do you know if you've heard, even maybe looking backwards a little bit, in terms of, because we've implemented different tax credits over the years, whether it's renter's tax credit, earned income tax credit. We're looking at doing more work on making childcare more affordable. From the things that we have already done that we might be able to learn from, have you heard, do you have any thoughts that you could share from the folks that you work with of, okay, which one of those policies actually worked so far? From their perspective, from the people who are really benefiting from them, or maybe which ones people maybe thought would work, but from what you're hearing on the ground, they didn't really make that much of a difference. So, because if I'm getting it right from the survey, it's kind of, this is what people are telling you right now is most important to them, and I'm wondering if there's any thought of what's worked up until now. And you can also just feel free to grab one of the questions from the chat as well. I saw that, for instance, Nikos had a question about us being a high tax state in some respect, among the lowest property taxes in the nation, and how can we better obtain revenue from these sources to provide relief to those in need, including ALA's households.
I'm sorry, which one was it?
So Nikos had a question. He noted,
okay.
Although Hawaii is a high tax state in some respects, we have among the lowest property taxes in the nation and one of the highest concentrations of millionaires in the nation. How can we better obtain revenue from these sources to provide relief to those in need, including ALA's households? And that just popped on my radar because obviously HCAN does a lot of work with ALA's households.
Yeah, so to get back to your prior question about what has worked and what hasn't, anytime that we can help parents get more money, they respond positively. During the pandemic, there was a program called Pandemic EBT, which provided basically debit cards to parents who were qualified for free or reduced price lunch. And they could use those debit cards to go buy food. And about 125,000 children and their families received these cards every year, with maybe $100 million in food purchasing dollars pumped into our state from the federal government. And we definitely heard back that, especially with the high inflation we've been having, that those cards were a godsend. You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was the unemployment. And then even after people got back to work, those cards were amazing. the pandemic is considered over. That program is phasing out, although we are currently working with Department of Human Services to get those last few rounds of cards out. For the tax credits, we haven't heard a lot about the earned income tax credit yet, because we just passed last session a policy to make it so that families get more money back. And one of the issues with our current tax credits is that they're kind of small. A lot of them have not been increased for inflation in a long time, similar to what Seth was saying about the tax brackets. We also haven't updated the tax credits. So I do think if we were to make the tax credits stronger, making more people eligible and giving them more money, it would help a lot. And then childcare has, I think everyone, even if you don't have children, knows that the cost has gotten higher and higher, and it's less and less affordable for parents. We did the survey a few years ago, again with UH, and we found that the average cost of childcare here in Hawaii was $13,000 a year. And that was 4 or 5 years ago. That's like sending a kid to college. So that's part of why with our legislative priorities, we have been focused on childcare as well. I think we all know that Lieutenant Governor Luke is intending to build hundreds of pre-K classrooms across the state, which we think is great. But in our analyses, the biggest problem with childcare is similar to what Mitzi was saying about regular teachers, is that childcare workers aren't paid enough. They actually get paid a lot less than most teachers. And so that sector has just been decimated. First with the pandemic, they shut down, and then now they can't get workers back. So we're actually seeing a lot of places have empty classrooms, but they don't have the workers. So the bills that we've been pushing last session and this session are really trying to touch on the childcare workforce, ways to get them better pay so that they can afford to live here and to take care of our children. And if I have time, I can talk a little bit about Nikos's question. Yeah, it's interesting. My family, most of my family lives in New Jersey, which has the highest property taxes in the nation. And I've been dealing with paying some property taxes on my father's house, and they are way high. They're about 8 or 9 times higher than here in Hawaii. And we don't want to hit people on limited incomes with higher taxes for sure. But at the same time, we have some of the most lavish, extravagant properties in the world, on our coastlines that are owned by celebrities and rich foreigners. And there must be some way to go and get the value there that we could get from those properties. It just seems like a real wasted resource. And there are ways to design these policies so that we're not hitting working families. So I do hope, I know property taxes are like the third rail for legislators and governors, and that they will, they're afraid to really address property taxes other than lowering them. But when you look at Hawaii's taxes compared to other states, it's just like this obvious place where we're just not getting the value that we should be getting. And that can help pay for all the things we're talking about, whether it's paying teachers more, childcare workers more, and getting more tax credits to parents. And then yes, we do have really high concentrations of millionaires here. There are a couple of representatives who've had some bills to try to tap those resources as well. There's a bill looking at the estate tax, which is what wealthy estates have to pay when somebody passes away, to try to get some more revenue from that. So when millionaires die, getting a little bit more taxes out of them. And also there's a bill for capital gains, which are the unearned profits off of the sale of stocks and bonds and art, and trying to just tax that at the same level as ordinary people's income. And that's super targeted up towards the top 5% would pay almost all of that capital gains tax if we just made it at the same level as income tax. And, combining that with tax credits and, childcare subsidies, for example, those are ways to get money to the Alice households. But, in our mind, it's a way to balance what we're seeing in terms of struggling working families in the midst of, super luxurious beachside mansions, and a whole bunch of millionaires residing here in Hawaii.
Thanks, Nicole. And that's a great start to kind of kicking off the broader panel discussion. I wanted to open it up to get into some of these questions in the Q&A. And Nicole, thanks for addressing the one from Nikos in there. I'm thinking, Brittany, there are a couple of questions in here that were addressed to you. One of them that just stuck out to me, I think you started addressing it a little bit, if I'm not mistaken, which is it was asking about, do business owners that you work with have difficult getting capital from local commercial banks? And just wondering from the perspective, to answer that question itself to the extent that you can, and just other things that you'd think people should know about the challenges that some of those local startup businesses are facing to try to make a go of it here.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So on whether or not it's difficult for them to get capital from banks, it all matters where they are in their life cycle. So the ones that are a little bit further along, they've been in business a few years, they have real tax returns and income to show that they have predictability around their profitability and their revenue streams. They have a much easier time working with the banks than the companies that are really early stage. If you're really early stage and you don't have a tax return or revenues to show the bank, by all of their federal regulations and all of the things that they're held to, that you can pay back the loan, that's what's in like the unbankable businesses side, right? You have to get to that point where you can show all of those requirements to get loans. Now, there are other options. There are certain like CDFIs and grants, but those things take a knowledge of the system. They take being at the right, having the right opportunity at the right time. And a lot of times when you're starting a business, like you don't know all of those different areas in which you can raise that type of capital. So I guess the short answer to your question is it just depends. If you're further along, they can absolutely work with banks. If they're earlier stage, then that's really difficult. And there's not a lot of startup capital available in our market for small businesses. So that's the answer to that. I know someone else is asking about exporting products versus exporting houses. I think those are just two very different things. And we could have a further discussion on that. But in terms of exporting products, it's unlimited, right? You could be at 5 million, then 10 million, then 20 million, then 50 million in revenue by servicing the global marketplace, which would be absolutely incredible for Hawaii, bringing all those new dollars into the state and having that circulate in our own economy. So I don't think that housing has that same ability, but yeah, that would be my response to that.
Thanks, Brittany. There were a couple of people who had asked some version of what do we mean by affordable? And one person had noted, and this is for anybody on the panel who'd like to weigh in, one person had noted that the HUD definition is spending no more than 30% of income on the cost of housing, including utilities. And I saw, I think it was last week, that KHON had issued a news report about a study that had recently come out ranking Hawaii as the least affordable state to live in. It was noting that according to this report, that the median household income in Hawaii is over $7,000 a month. The average cost for a mortgage in Hawaii is $4,400 a month, meaning that most Hawaii residents spend more than 60% of their income on housing. And for that reason, this particular study listed Hawaii as the most unaffordable place in the country. And I know in talking with some legislators, they've noted that other things that don't necessarily get as much attention in the news, like transportation costs. Apparently in Hawaii, the average Hawaii resident spends 30% of their income on transportation costs, which could include anything from fuel to car payments to bus passes. So when we're talking about affordability here, it's not just affordable housing, it's access to healthcare, transportation, housing to be sure, education. So anybody from the panel would like to weigh in with just things that you would want people to think of as we talk about what exactly is affordable? What does it mean?
I mean, I would say one very clear other just evidence point of Hawaii being unaffordable is the amount of out-migration that we have, and just more people leaving than ever because there's better opportunities to make ends meet in other locations. So I would just add that as an additional data point. But I guess, affordability at the most basic level is you can, pay your expenses, live a comfortable lifestyle, and be able to put some money in the bank for savings. And I just think by all the data that we're seeing, that's just not happening for a large portion of our state.
Thanks, Brittany. And Mitzi, I see that you came back on screen. So you got some thoughts to share on this one?
Yeah, I was just looking at, we hear AMI tossed around a lot, and we see affordable building housing projects going up, and they're saying that affordability is 140% AMI. So I was looking at what exactly is that number? And so when I was looking for Oahu, it was for a single person, that's 111,000. And I was like, are you kidding me? That's 140% AMI. I mean, teachers start at 50,000, and many, oh my gosh, probably almost all don't make that much singly. Now, okay, so if you're a 2-parent household, that's fine. I mean, it gets better, but then you can't have a certain amount of property or whatever the case may be. But I was just thinking that AMI for Hawaii is exceptionally high. And if we're building houses that are in fact affordable, I think anything that says 140 AMI, that is not affordable for most people in Hawaii. So that was just something that I was kind of looking at, what is the average? And I was looking at a lot of statistics. And then I was seeing things like for Hawaii, they were saying that for a household survival budget, like this is from the Alice families, is 90,000 for 2 adults, an infant, and a 4-year-old, and $90,828. And I'm like, I'm thinking about people I know, and I'm thinking about teachers I know, and I'm thinking about laborers I know. And that tells me what the statistics are saying, that there are many people that are just one paycheck away from not making it and not being affordable. So when we're talking about numbers about what is affordable, and for especially, for anyone working in Hawaii, that rent is accounting for more than 50% of their income, or 60% in many cases. This is a huge problem. So when we think of numbers, it's good, I think, not just to say the 140% AMI or 100% AMI, but give that number. What is that income? Because I don't think a lot of people understand how much that is. And when you put it in those numbers, they can say, oh my gosh, that's not our household. We don't even make that much. And I think that's important.
Thanks, Mitzi. And just a quick note, by the way, a couple of people had asked about the HCAN survey, the Hawaii Children's Action Network survey, and I see that Heather has put that into the chat for everybody. So please go ahead and take a look at that and participate if you're one of the folks who was looking for it. Before I move over to some of the other questions, Seth, Nicole, would either of you like to kind of weigh in on that question of what do we mean by affordable?
I mean, I'll weigh in on it. It's like some number divided by another number, and somebody saying, oh, 30% is too expensive or 50% is too expensive, right? And so we know Hawaii is super expensive. It's hard for anybody who lives here, teachers, service industry, even higher income people, they have a hard time living here because Hawaii is expensive, right? And so I caution too much about getting lost in like, oh, this is affordable or this, because it just kind of talks to like this larger issue in Hawaii is like, we've created a system where a lot of things are out of reach of normal people. And this is not unique to Hawaii, by the way. Like, I would bet you look at similar numbers in San Francisco and New York or in really high rent cities, and you're going to have something similar. It's not as bad because it's not the entire state, right? But you have something similar, right? So just, I think it's helpful, or at least it's helpful for me when I start to think about these things, like really think about what's going on underneath these denominations. And they're great for generating headlines, but at the end of the day, what we know is we don't have enough housing, right? And we kind of make housing illegal to build, right, through our zoning laws and things like that. And our choice, because we live in the United States. Me too. I don't have one, but I would love a big house, But in Hawaii, the future is to live in high rises, right? And that's an explicit decision, not by me, but by the zoning commissions, at least in Oahu, right? So we're just going to have to make do with that, and we have to understand what that means. I would say, in terms of affordability, in terms of we can be upset about affordability. What we should really be concerned about is how do we come up with solutions to address this affordability, right? And we can come up with any numbers that we want, but what's going to really address the affordability issue? And there's little things that we can think about, particular policies and the merits of different levels of taxation, and alleviate burdens for certain aspects of our populations, which are incredibly important. I never want to downplay that. But at the end of the day, we have to think about what incentive, our economy is in a system, right? So how do we create a system that perpetually creates new housing? How do we create a system that supplies transportation at a lower level? And that's not about saying, it will involve having quotients on affordable housing and things like that, right? But at the bigger issue is how do we create a system where people are oh, great, people are paying more for homes, I'll build another home, I'll build way more homes, or I can come up with the innovative way of providing new products. And this is why we really need Mana Up, right? Because Mana Up they're not trying to pick winners. They're just trying to support a vast array of businesses, and the businesses nobody knows who's going to be the next great business in Hawaii. But what we want to do is we want to facilitate and support number of entrepreneurs, help them take risks, help them go out and try new things and see what works.
Thanks, Seth.
Thanks,
Brittany, you opened up your window there.
Oh, I was just thanking Seth for the shout out.
Well, so of course, anybody else? Nicole, if you wanted to weigh in on, yes, you open up your window too, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, a little bit in the direction that Seth is talking about affordability. The 30% standard that Kevin Carney mentioned, who is a retired affordable housing developer, and his housing was actually affordable. I see in the chat a lot of talk about how calling affordability, at some of these housing developments at the 140% AMI that Mitzi was mentioning is just puts it out of the reach of most people. But Kevin's very familiar with the federal standards, and the 30% is something that's been used around the country. That's what affordable housing should be. And when we look at census data with families with children, Hawaii we're 48th in the country by one census data. There's another group called the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Every year they show us to have the least affordable housing in the nation. So that's a pretty easy one, is housing. But you could look at it from another direction. We have the ALICE group. I hope everybody knows about it, but United Way here, Aloha United Way, they've been putting out these reports about asset limited, income constrained, employed people. So they're working, but they can't afford to make ends meet. Their latest analysis showed that for a family of four to afford the basic necessities, they needed to make over $100,000 a year for that family of four. We also have DBED, Department of Business and Economic Development and Tourism here in Hawaii. They do a self-sufficiency income standard every other year. And they, for 2020, which is the latest year that they analyzed, showed that the family of four needed, like 85,000 a year, and that was 3 years ago. So we have a sense of what income levels we want to get people to be able to afford to live here. Often when we talk about affordability, we're talking about like bringing prices down, which is, I think, kind of in a way harder than trying to find ways to raise people's incomes up. And tax credits are another way to help people keep money in their pockets so that they actually have more money to afford things. So that was just sort of my thoughts about defining affordability. Sometimes it's really hard to look at it from how much should things cost. We often look at it from how much do people need to afford things. I don't know if that made sense, but.
Well, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to have the different perspectives on here. Because, for instance, we've gotten a couple of questions in here about one from Laren about would subsidies and higher wages without higher productivity and greater supply just equal more dollars chasing the same quantity of goods. Paul Brubaker has noted that living cost differentials are not about Alice, says that free money for the two lower income quintiles is not the solution to high living cost. Income's mostly about productivity. And with that kind of those kind of comments, one thing I'd be curious, and I think Leslie, I think I've got to turn it back to you in 5 to 10 minutes to close us out. Jump in if I'm wrong. But I was curious just to see if we could have a little bit of conversation about, because there isn't one answer, right? And people on this call have different perspectives that they're working on. I mean, with Mana Up, you're generating new businesses and you're creating new revenue sources there as a result. With Nicole, you're trying to help the people who are in the most dire economic straits go ahead and lift themselves up and give them the help they need to become more self-sufficient. And Seth and Mitzi, you both have your own perspectives on those things. So I'm kind of curious, we've got about 10 minutes left. And so we've got to solve the issues of affordability in the next 10 minutes on this panel. But just a little bit of discussion about maybe where these different perspectives, how can we talk with each other about that? If there are areas where lessons from one sector could benefit another, some areas perhaps where there has been some useful discussion and collaboration in the past that you can point to about how we can talk about these things in a constructive way. Anyone want to jump in on that? Where can we find some cross-sector dynamics, cross-sector solutions to address these complicated problems?
Well, I'd like to share one example, and it's a seemingly small example, but I feel like if it was done at a broader scale, it could have a pretty massive impact, which is something that we've done at Mana Up, which, we work with Hawaiian Airlines. And Hawaiian Airlines, when we talked to them 5 years ago, had a goal of increasing their local spending, I think doubling it every single year, right? So they were committed to local spending, but they often had a challenge with which entrepreneurs are ready, who's the right businesses. And so we're able to work with them to say, hey, here's a business that you can work with who can meet the supply for your first class cabin or can meet the supply for your main cabin passengers. And so by doing that and creating this partnership, we're able to shift, some of the spending that they might have spent in maybe things that came from China or maybe things that came from the mainland United States or whatever, and actually invest it into our local economy to the tune of what could be millions and millions of dollars. And so I feel like those cross-sector collaborations of sharing objectives and thinking about how we can contribute to each other's success is something to learn from. And where are those more win-win solutions where it helps our own economy thrive and also, helps from, Hawaiian Airlines standpoint. They now have great local products they can sell online and offer to their passengers, which, enhances their guest experience. So it's just a small example that I feel like could be adopted in a lot of different areas.
That's great. Thanks, Brittany. Mitzi, I see that you've opened up your window there too.
Yeah, I was thinking of cross-sector things that we've tried, and I deal a lot with the legislature and getting legislation passed. And one of the things we've been trying to work on, and Nicole, feel free to chime in because you are the data girl, but paid family leave, social insurance model. We're all in, everybody chips in. It's minimal cost per employee. And we're talking the employees are chipping in. Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, with the latest numbers, was it $8 per month on average? And what it would provide is 16 weeks paid family leave for whether it's maternity, paternity, taking care of an elderly, our kupuna, whatever it is. And then it had a sliding scale saying those who earn the least would get the most, like 90% of their wages while they're out, because what they found in states who have actually done the paid family leave social insurance model or other models, they have found that those who are on the lowest pay scale, like those making minimum wage, were least likely to take it because they couldn't afford to take it if it was at, say, 50% of their wages. But if it's at 90% of the wages, they can afford to take it. And what's good for employers to remember is some cases when they have to take leave regardless, whether it's paid or unpaid. You may lose that employee, and training is costly. That like teacher turnover is costly. Let me tell you, retraining people to do the job of someone who is really good is extremely difficult, and that's for any business. So when you have a turnover in your employees, that creates a bigger headache for you and more money because you have to retrain. But if you have paid family leave that is open to them, and everybody thinks, the pushback we get is, oh, everybody's going to take it. No, they don't. They actually don't. They take it when they need it, and it's there to sustain their employees. And the employees are so grateful to the businesses that they stick around and they're loyal and they're great employees. So it's a win-win. So medical care is one of those affordability pieces that you have to think of. And sometimes it's just taking time off for work to care for someone who needs medical care, like at home. Because usually as hospitals, they don't stay the whole time, but they still need to recover at home. But they need someone there caring for them. And that's what paid medical leave is for, part of what it's for. And so that's something that we've been working with other unions and other entities to try and get passed through our legislature to try and help this affordability issue and to help keep their workers. That's one thing. And we were doing it at a no cost to employers. It's just as a matter of employees all in chipping in, no matter what size their business, so that it can be affordable for Hawaii.
Thanks, Mitzi. And I think I'm just about at the point where I've got to turn it back, but I saw Brittany, you'd pulled up your window. So let me, what were you gonna jump in with?
Oh, I was just gonna address, there's several comments in the chat around, land use and regulatory barriers and permitting that drive up the cost of anything tied to real estate. And I just wanted to echo that of, we had a company in our portfolio that had to wait a year for a permit to open up a retail location. And it was $6,000 a month that they had to pay to their landlord. And, they were one of the few that had investors. So they, were able to draw on capital to be able to pay that, 6 times 12 for, a year. But, that's not a lot of people that can afford that. And a normal person probably just wouldn't even pursue opening a business at all. And so, I think some things like that is a regulatory barrier that the government definitely has in their control. And they're eventually issuing the permit anyway. And so how can we ease these sorts of things so that, that $72,000 can go towards, employees, to growing the business, to marketing, to other things that can really help local people.
Thanks, Brittany. Thanks for addressing some of those in there. And then there was one other thing I'd seen earlier on, Seth, that was directed to you. Maybe one last specific question was asking if there are any supply restrictions that are within our control, especially those that prevent expanding the supply of healthcare and housing. From what you've seen from reports and statistics coming into the Department of Taxation. Seth, anything you can illuminate there?
Yeah, and at the same time, let me address, it's kind of an interesting question too, is like I saw that Nico said that we have the highest concentration of millionaires, right? So it kind of goes, let me address that one, because I think this is an interesting problem, right? Because yes, there's lots of wealth in Hawaii, but we can't tax it. We have a very difficult hard time taxing it through our individual income tax because they're not residents. Right. So that just, as Nikos was kind of astute in saying, like, oh, property taxes are probably the more appropriate way of doing things. But it is important to think that, like, we do not have huge economic engines other than tourism and the military. Right. And so we don't have that many millionaires that are state residents. And so that should affect the way that we start to think about these problems and things. And what do people want to use? They want to use land use, right? And so going back to these kind of like land use laws is like one of the things that we have to come to terms with as a society is like, what do we want our future to be? Like, we want the country to keep the country, and then we want to have the city, but we don't want to have too congested of cities. Right. And those are just kind of incompatible visions for how we want to go forward. And, you know, like, if we want to keep the country, what happens is rich people buy country estates. And those include some of those millionaires that are not part of, like, residents of Hawaii. So we can allow, you know, tract developments in agricultural areas. I don't know if that's the right approach for Hawaii. That people have to decide that together, but, you know, economics is pretty good at helping us understand the inevitable trade-offs that we have to make in order to choose something. And at least from my opinion, I think it's always better to choose a future rather than not choosing and just being frustrated with everything is also a way of choosing. And that's kind of, in one of my models of Hawaii, that's kind of where we are right now. We don't want to make the hard choices, and so we get kind of like the worst case scenarios. So I'll end with that.
Well, that is probably a good thought-provoking place to finish us up for today. I know I do have to turn it over to Leslie right now to bring us home. So just a quick thank you so much to all of the panelists. Nicole had to jump off for a 1 p.m. meeting. Also, like I said, it is that time of year. We have our decking deadline at the legislature at the end of next week for everybody who's following that. But I, for one, am definitely looking forward to continuing this conversation. Leslie, I'm sure you'll be able to hopefully capture some of the questions that we didn't get to in the chat. But thank you. Thanks to all the panelists. And Leslie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Joshua. Appreciate that. Wow, thank you, panelists. What a great discussion we had today. A lot of questions, a lot of engagement for our audience. So I hope that we can continue this conversation, continue to explore these issues. Seth emphasized a couple times, this is a system, it's a complex issue, really, that there's no clear solution. Obviously, that came through. There's a lot of different factors to consider, but thank you, panelists. I'm just blown away again and again by the level of expertise and the depth of the discussion that we have in these panels. So thank you for taking the time to join us today and contributing your perspectives. Attendees, thank you also for tuning in. Joshua, thank you so much for your moderation. Excellent work with that. That was great. Thank you, Ben Trevino, who put this all together. He really handled a lot of the logistics. Thank you to Heather Walters, who handles the behind the scenes logistics and facilitated much of the coordination. And thank you to our panelists. Again, appreciate your time. I want to just announce here, feedback form, that link is on your screen, and you'll also receive that via email. Wanted to let you know we have a few events coming up. Mark your calendars to join us next month for an online discussion with our newly minted governor, Josh Green, in which we'll discuss his first 100 days, moderated by Colin Moore and Neil Milner. And that event is posted on our website, so you can register now. Then in late April, join us to discuss Hawaii's manufacturing sector with Dr. Harm Jam Steenhouse. And also, don't forget, of course, to complete that feedback form for today's event. We do look at those. We do take your feedback and your suggestions seriously. I want to thank everybody for your patience as well as we got started today with a couple of difficulties off screen, but I do appreciate you hanging in there and sticking with us. We hope to see you at one of our upcoming events there on the screen. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. Aloha.